you very much for having me, and thank you to Jed for the amusing start to the day. It was great. So as you said, my name's Ben Widdowson. I'm from Siemens, previously from a slightly smaller company called Lightworks based in Sheffield, and we were actually acquired last year, so a lot of change for our company going on at the minute, and I'll talk a bit more about that at the end. So I'm going to focus on how automotive design teams are using VR in their workflows today. It's by no means a perfect world at the moment, as Jed's already alluded to, but it's really interesting, and some of the future developments are super exciting, so we'll get into that. So I'm going to start off by talking about some of the challenges that some of these designers face, mainly in their existing workflows, some of the challenges specifically around VR. Slipstream is the solution we're working on. I'm going to talk a bit about that. Some interesting future developments that we're looking at, and then I'll touch a little bit on what Lightworks do at the end. Let's just start by looking at some of the things designers are doing. Incidentally, we do have the designer of this particular car sat in the audience, and he's going to speak after me. But one of the challenges that designers have is that they're very creative. They want to spend a lot of time coming up with new ideas, creating, iterating, refining their designs. But when you're in a commercial environment with a pressure to release a car every so often, you really have to kind of limit the amount of creativity you do and get your designs out the door. So one of the things we often hear is we wish we had more time to be creative. So in a kind of typical design process, you'll come up with all your sketches at the start, then you'll get into some 3D modelling, some clay modelling, and at this front end, right where they're doing all their sketch work, this is where most of the new ideas come. And as I said, a lot of people tell us that they wish they had more time to spend refining their ideas at this point before they have to move further downstream. One of the things designers do is they obviously have to show their ideas to their managers and to their directors. So they do design reviews, and these can be just at their desk, or they can be, in a more kind of elaborate setting to an executive. And when you've got a very complex car in CAD, there's a lot of parts, it's a big file. And if they want to do a really high-end VR design review, you've got to spend a lot of time manually crunching that data down and optimizing it to look at in VR. So one of the stats we heard is that they obviously want to go from something complex like this to something that looks great. And as I said, that takes a lot of time. And one of the statements we heard from one of our customers, who I can't name unfortunately, but one of their designers will often spend about a day a week, bearing in mind this guy's paid to be creative and come up with new ideas. They'll spend about a day a week just manually stripping data down to view in VR. And this just struck us as a crazy amount of time that you're paying a creative person to just do kind of grunt work, really. So this is kind of part of the problem that we were looking to solve. So when they come up with their sketches, they create the models, they're doing these design reviews, they're often always doing physical prototypes as well. The actual iteration cycle from coming up with a new idea, refining it and reviewing it is massive. It takes days, weeks, and what they would like to do is kind of make a lot more of these decisions a lot quicker. And also when you get to making prototypes, things like this, where they're milling huge great lumps of clay to actually evaluate the surface of a car, for instance. One of these things takes about a week to mill, and then you have people manually scraping it to make it look nice and smooth, maybe spraying parts of it up or wrapping it in something called Dynoc to make it look like car paint. It's an enormous investment for these companies, and it takes at least a week to produce one of these things. They cost about 200k a pop. In other sectors, they're fabricating the cabs for, say, a digger or something like that, and they're using data that they send to the fabricator to build it. And the design moves on, so by the time the prototype actually gets to the point where you can look at it, all the data is out of date. So it's an enormous waste of time and money and resource. And it's not to say that physical prototypes don't have their place, because clearly they do. They're very visceral, and you can touch them and feel them and make great decisions. But if you could, make more of these decisions in VR and do the prototype at the right time when the data is a bit more finished, then that's kind of the world these guys would like to get to. This was another interesting quote from one of the automotive manufacturers in the UK. So currently they do 90% of their design reviews using a clay model with a similar kind of cost, and they do about 10% in VR, and by 2020 they'd like to flip that round. So they'd like to be doing 90% of them in VR and 10% in clay. So some of the challenges specifically around VR, not necessarily just around the design review. To get a car or any VR experience looking as good as that, as any of the speakers will tell you, it takes a lot of effort. You know, if you're bringing heavy CAD data, you've obviously got to optimize it, but then to get it into the game engine and work at the lighting and the materials, and if you want to do any interactions like opening doors and things, it's a lot of manual effort to prepare that experience. You know, Jed's already talked a lot about the state of the headsets. You know, they're great. People want them to be higher res. People want to touch and feel things and a more visceral experience, and we're not quite there with all that yet. So, you know, the hardware is definitely a limiting factor at the moment, but it is getting better. So ultimately, you kind of ask, well, why would people bother? If it's that much effort to do it, why do people bother? And I think most people here will know that once you actually get that headset on, it is an incredible experience. So the problem we're trying to solve is how can we make it easier for people to get into VR in a design review type experience without going through all that manual effort and have it looking great. So ultimately what people want is something that's super simple. You know, press a button and give me a result. I don't want to be doing anything manual. They want it to be automatic and they want it to look stunning. So those are the kind of really high level parameters that we're working in with Slipstream. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the solution itself. Incidentally, this demo is at the back, so you can go and have a look at this. This is the stunning Bandita, which is designed. The Bandit. La Bandita, which is designed by the Hackrod team, of which Felix is here today. So in a nutshell, Slipstream is a solution that can take your data, automatically prepare it for multiplayer VR design reviews. So we just unpack that a little bit. The automation is taking the raw CAD data and doing all the crunching. The multiplayer bit is super important because a lot of these companies have locations all over the world and they all want to dive into experiences at the same time. Incidentally, we had the Hackrod team having quite a cool demo with a couple of the Siemens folk and their team across the US a couple of weeks ago, which I've got a few photos of. And then the high-end bit, which I'll talk about in a minute, there's a lot of CAD applications where you can just stick a headset on and look at the model. That's good and it's got its place. But what we're really focusing on is this kind of high-end, very immersive, as real as it can possibly look type experience. So I've got a short video here which I'll play for you, just to kind of illustrate some of the things I'm showing. So in a nutshell, I'm not going to go into the depths of how it technically works because there's lots of complicated, boring stuff in there, but fundamentally what we can do is take the kind of source CAD data that designers are working on. We have a system that can run in the background that can automatically take it, strip it down, remove parts, optimize the mesh of the actual car to make it performant in VR at 90 frames a second. And then we can automatically dump it into the game engine and actually build the executable. So the end user, all they do is press a button, and at the end of it, they just double click the app and they get the results. They don't have to do any work. They can do more creative stuff, which is great. So as I say, we kind of focus on a few of these things. We want it to be really simple, automated, stunning, and multiplayer. So I'm just going to quickly touch on a couple of those things. So as I say, the simple part of it is really kind of simplifying the workflow. So it's taking it from days of work in lots of different applications to just a single button press. Every time you run a new bit of data through, so a new design, it stores that pipeline and that executable, so you can go back and look at last week's work, which is great for kind of comparison and seeing what we've done since last week. The automated data prep side is all about saving time so they can actually focus on the creativity. as I said, this is super important for the designers because they can come up with better designs and come up with more ideas as well, rather than doing the manual work. This is quite an interesting one. So originally we started out providing these experiences to customers just in a kind of generic blank white studio. And very quickly all of our customers started saying, well, could you just create a model of our courtyard or our design studio? And we were wondering, well, why do they want to do that? And the reason they want to do it is because that's how they review their real prototypes in the real world. You know, they've got a real studio, a real courtyard, and they roll these cars out to go and look at them in the real light, and they wanted to kind of replicate that experience and enable teams who weren't located in that particular office to have the same experience. So a lot of our car company customers, we've actually built full 3D environments of a lot of their studios, their warehouses, their courtyards, and they're available as kind of interchangeable levels in a game effectively that they can switch between. And it's quite interesting because a lot of them want a very realistic looking environment, but they also want it to be quite subtle as well. They don't necessarily want it to be perfect. They want to like strip out a lot of the clutter, for instance, and make it able for the designers to really kind of focus on the product that they're looking at. But we thought that's a really interesting thing that people are requesting, that we just assumed they just want a blank studio, but they actually want to kind of look at it in a familiar place. So here's Felix's colleague Mouse. They had one of the execs from Siemens over last week, a couple of weeks ago in LA. So this is the best shot I could find of your studio. You've probably got more than me, but you can kind of see how the windows are quite similar, the kind of wall panels quite similar. They've got the pictures on the back wall. So you know, this is the environment we've created for the Hackrod team, and it's supposed to be very illustrative of where they work and where they do their design. The other really interesting part that we've only really discovered properly in the last year about how important it is the multiplayer angle. You know, other people call it collaboration or multi-person or something. We think they're a little bit dry, and we think using the gaming term multiplayer perfectly describes it. So this is when, you know, teams who are not co-located want to jump into the same experience together. And again, this is super compelling. If you've got a guy in the States interacting with a guy in London, looking at the same model at exactly the same time, you know, it just strips away all that kind of complexity about geography. You're totally immersed in the same environment, even though you're thousands of miles away. And the feedback we've had, particularly from this, we just kind of think of it as a feature, but it's really, really important to these teams who are, you know, distributed across the globe. So again, here's the Hackrod guys having a demo. These are the guys located in LA, and there was another guy over in DC or New Jersey, yeah, all at the same time. So that's pretty cool. And then the final bit, as I said before, it's weird. These companies make physical models out of clay, like I showed you before. And one of the most weird requests we have is, well, can you make a clay shader that we can put on in VR, which just seems totally counterintuitive. So they can look at a fake prototype in VR, but you know, hey, that's what people want, so that's fine. But we're very, very keen to stress that VR is definitely not a replacement for physical. You know, haptics and things are just not there yet, but it can get you a long way down the process. And if you can make quicker decisions in VR and spend your money on prototypes when you need to, but then we think that's better. So just a little bit of a teaser here for something we're working on with a customer. We've not actually shown this anywhere yet. We'll probably have a slightly cooler demo of this later in the year, but this is kind of just to give you a feel for it. So one of the things car companies do is they've started building these, it's almost like a giant Meccano rig that they call the Buck, and it's super simple. It just has a couple of car seats bolted to an aluminium rig with a steering wheel, and that's it really. But what it does is it means that when you're in VR, particularly if you're wireless, you can actually walk. Obviously you're looking at the car, not the rig. You can walk all around the car. Some of the ones we're working on have doors, so you can actually reach out and grab a door, open the door, climb into the seat, adjust your seating position, and all this is tracked and it all moves in VR with the real one. You can adjust your steering, and some of these guys are going way overboard with it and actually 3D printing kind of panels of dashboards and door panels as they design them. So they'll come up with a new design, 3D print it, literally like stick it to the rig, and they can, in VR, they're looking at what looks like a real car, and in the real world in front of them without the headset on, they've got this kind of blue foam or 3D printed thing, but it just gives you that extra sense of immersion when you're in the car, and it's a lot quicker to do than building one of those full clay models. So yeah, we've been working on this with customer. The real challenge here is not building these bucks, they're fairly straightforward, but it's more about figuring out how to use the Vive pucks, the little trackers, and how you can fix them to different parts of the rig to get the tracking consistent, and grouping parts. So like you need to tell the system what a door is, so it knows all the parts to move in VR, for instance. But again, I've tried this, and it's just another level of kind of immersion when you're in there and you're looking at a VR car, but you can actually reach out and touch bits. It's a massive stepping stone while we're still waiting for the haptics to catch up. So this is something we're working on. We're hoping to have a kind of demo rig that we can bring out to a show maybe later in the year, so keep an eye out for that. So that's pretty much it. I'll just quickly touch on Lightworks. As I say, we were acquired by Siemens back end of last year, so there's a lot of change for us at the moment, but what it really means is we've now got the backing of a big company, big software company, so we can fast track a lot of the development that we're working on with Slipstream, and hopefully get it out to a lot more people a lot more quickly. So actually our team is based in the UK, up in Sheffield. There's about 30 of us, mostly software engineers, and we do a few other things which I'll just touch on. So our background is high-end rendering, so we take the iRay rendering engine and we help CAD companies integrate it into their CAD applications for doing sort of photoreal visualization with your CAD data. We've got a couple of iRay plugins which we built for systems like 3D Studio Max and Maya. And then we also do some custom software development for things like configurators. So we've done a big project with Gulfstream in the States where they've got a really cool kind of design stroke sales experience which they take out to show. So there's a kind of $60 million jets being designed live, which is really cool. That's it, that's me. Thank you very much for coming. And we've got a demo at the back, which you're more than welcome to come and try. And if you've got any specific questions about the car, then Felix is your man.